Hello everybody, Ben Rogers here, the Raptors Digest. Riker, we got some amazing news surrounding the NBA today, but before we dive into that, obviously the world's been sort of turned upside down over the past few months now, and more recently with the murder and the protests in the United States, there's a lot of stuff happening. We just sort of want to address the protests and what's sort of going on in the social world right now, and obviously, there's been some systemic racism in the United States, even in Canada, where obviously both you and I are located, and we just want to show our support for people fighting against that, and we're hoping everyone protesting is staying safe, and it's just wild times, Riker.
Yeah, absolutely, Ben, and that's just the message that we want to convey, and everybody listening. Of course, the NBA, multiple teams have made statements and are doing things to support everything that's going on, and I think the one fortunate thing that's going to come out of all this is that because of the lockdowns and everybody being less busy in their lives, despite all the violence, etc., this message is the loudest that I've heard it in my life, and I think that there can be a lot of positive things that come from this in terms of making a change and and really taking a lot of good steps forward. So just making sure that everybody that's listening to this, if you're participating in protests, try to make sure that you're doing so and protecting your own safety and those around you, and make sure that you're educated on what it is that you're supporting. So with that being said, Ben, we are talking about the NBA returning, and that has us extremely excited. We've been mulling back and forth all what I'll call the forced off season. Or just the waiting period, and now, Ben, the curtains are finally getting drawn back, and there's it looks like there's going to be the resuming of the NBA on the other side.
Yeah, for sure. So Adrian Wojnarowski came out today and said the NBA plans on returning. I believe it's July 31st. So that's the plan for the teams right now. It's just going to get validated tomorrow. All the league offices are going to make a vote for it, and the consensus is that this sort of format will get passed, and it's really interesting. We've obviously just made a video talking about whether the playoffs will be the traditional 1 through 8 in each conference, or if it will be a mix of 16 seeds. I haven't really seen any information regarding that specifically, but it looks like 22 teams are going to get invited to sort of play in this Orlando bubble everyone's been talking about since the start, and there'll be about 8 regular season games played for each team, and then We'll get into the playoffs, and if the 9th seed in each conference is I think it's 4 games, is within 4 games of the 8th seed, there'll be a play-in tournament. So what are your just thoughts on this whole entire format? Do you like it? Do you sort of like having a regular season rather than the play-in things, sort of the things that have been floating around? Or, yeah,
I think it's perfect, Ben. I think it's perfect. It sort of ties in and integrates all of the things that we speculated on. We thought, in that conversation that we had, would it be better or not to have somewhat of a regular season before you jump straight into a playoff bracket? 1, to shake the rust off, 2, to size up your competition, maybe run a couple of plays that you want to try before the postseason comes. And I think, but in contrast with how hard will players actually want to play, given what's at stake. How likely is it that you'll be able to run a lot of games consecutively, given you're only going to have a few courts? I think it's perfect to have a few games to let everybody get back into the rhythm, let viewers know that this is happening, right? Give people time to tune in, to get adjusted to the new format, to watching the game with no fans. I think that there is going to be a little bit of adjustment period, and then to have a play-in tournament. Ben, I read somewhere, I can't remember where, that sources were saying that the NBA is looking at basically ensuring that no matter what the format is, Zion Williamson's team, the Pelicans, Zion Williamson specifically, will make it to the playoffs. And I thought that made total sense, right? You want to have your biggest superstars of the modern era crack the playoffs, and I think it's perfect. Some people might say, the East is getting a little bit slighted here, but that's definitely not the case. If you wanted your team to make it to this sort of pre-postseason, then you got to have a better record leading up to it, and I think it's good to bring back all the contenders and to cut the rest that really aren't that interesting to watch anyways.
Yeah, I'm in full agreement with you. I think the format that they chose was really strong, and you mentioned it, bringing guys like Zion, who wasn't necessarily in the top 16. At least we get to see 8 more games of him play this season, and maybe get a chance to make the playoffs and catch the Grizzlies, and guys like Damian Lillard and all that. And Yeah, you brought it up. The Western Conference, they obviously are having 13 teams brought in, the East only having 9, because those are the only teams that could potentially make the playoffs under this format, and really the only teams that had a realistic shot. They weren't going to bring back everyone for this bubble sort of environment to keep everyone safe, so I think they brought back the right number. I like that we're getting regular season games before rather than a tournament and really competitive play. It spices things up for sort of, building momentum into the playoffs. It gives players time to break off the rust and that sort of thing. So I'm really happy with the format, but it's really, and you're going to hear this broken down every day on every sort of news channel about how the NBA is sort of coming back, but we want to sort of look at it from a Raptors perspective. And obviously the Raptors are currently at the 2nd seed in the Eastern Conference, Riker, and they have about 8 games to sort of hold their spot. It's going to be tough to catch the Bucks right now for the 1st seed. They're a good few games ahead of us now, but the Boston Celtics are about 3 games behind the Toronto Raptors. Do you think there's any chance that we should worry about potentially losing seeding positioning during this sort of 8 games? Because it could be pretty unpredictable.
Yeah,
teams come back.
You should always worry. Yeah, of course, but you should always worry. It's not a disadvantage that you're coming back from an extended break because every team will be doing the exact same thing. I'm not sure where most Raptors players are posted up now. You said some guys are down in the States. A lot of guys are probably at their family homes, of course. But I think that it's unlikely. I think it's all about strategy at this point, Ben, because the Raptors, if anything, they're in a better situation having one of the most perpetually unhealthy rosters in the NBA, right? You've given your guys such a long break. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, this season, last season, the season before that, they're a very unlucky team when it comes to core players getting injured very frequently and minor injuries, just little stuff that just fractures rotations and just constant adaptation. But I think that this is a benefit. It's a positive for the Toronto Raptors. You could make the same argument for other teams, but we both know, we felt it all season long, that if the Raptors are playing to win, that there's no team with an advantage on them except for, maybe the Bucks. That's a good series. The Lakers, that's a good series. The Clippers, that's a good series. But in terms of the Celtics, in terms of the 76ers, there's no reason if the Raptors wanted to maintain that 2nd seed and they needed to win a few crucial games that they can't get the job done.
Yeah, for sure. I'm in agreement. We obviously know the Celtics are a strong team, and we're not really sure how the schedule is going to play out in terms of strength of schedule, if they're going to put teams into pools or they're going to look at who played who prior in the regular season. But we have a 3-game advantage on the Celtics. There's no other team we really have to worry about with just 8 games to be played. The Miami Heat are about 5.5 games back, and then the Pacers and Sixers, they're completely out of the picture in terms of catching the Raptors. So it's looking like we're going to stay in that 2nd seed. And with everything that's sort of been alluded to, I feel like if the NBA was switching to that 16 seed format, sort of reseeding everything for the playoffs, they wouldn't have made it super decisive about how the 9th seed in the East would be chasing the 8th seed in the East, and then same thing for the West. From the way things have been worded by Woj and other people reporting on the situation, I have a gut feeling that it's going to go be with the regular, normal playoff sort of standings. And obviously, the first round matchup, assuming it's the Brooklyn Nets, and that could obviously change with this sort of 8 games that each team has to play to finish out the season. But we're not really worried about the first round of any series. But in history, when we play the Boston Celtics, it's usually the home team that gets the win. And this has been the case, since they've had Isaiah Thomas sort of leading the way. We had DeMar, those sort of battles. So do you think not having teams being in their home court, right? Obviously, we would have had home court advantage against the Celtics in a normal setting if we were the 2nd seed, they were the 3rd. But do you think home court advantage will, because that's completely out of the window, will have an effect in sort of a playoff series against one of these teams?
Well, this is a big eye test, Ben, because, I think in terms of standings, I guess you're right, actually. If there's no home court advantage, then standings doesn't really make a difference in terms of home court advantage. It's just for placement and which teams you're going to face in each match. And I think that the NBA as a league, they have a lot of influence now over what the placements will be, because I suspect they're going to put a lot of the lower West seed teams against each other. And, they could put the most interesting matchups. They could do a lot of the high seeded. They could do the Raptors Celtics, Raptors 76ers, right? A lot of challenging games leading up to playoffs. I don't think that they're going to do a lot of cross-conference games unless there's a reason to do it. But I think definitely, Ben, if we're talking specifically the Raptors versus the Celtics, if that does turn out to be a playoff matchup, personally, I hope it does. We're long overdue to face them in the playoffs and really, set that rivalry and put it to bed once and for all. But I think back to what I said at the beginning was it's really eye test. It's what team needs momentum more if you're in a drought, right? Or if the other team is going through a run, or, maybe a 12-0 run or a 15-0 run, or Kyle Lowry's missing a couple threes. What team, or, you could say the same thing vice versa for the Boston Celtics, right? Just swap in whatever their player, their best player. Jason Tatum is maybe missing a few threes. What team needs the crowd to get them going again? And I would hope, Ben, because on offense, I think that they feed a lot off of the energy in the Raptors arena. But I think that the Raptors team defense is oftentimes what helps them get through slumps and gets them back and engaged in games. That and their bench coming in and performing, again, in the defensive situations and hitting a few key shots. So I think the Raptors are big homers. They definitely play better at home, but I think to me, it's their defensive ability that would set them apart.
Yeah, no, I'm in agreement with that. And that's something interesting, too, to look at for this sort of setup. And obviously they get 8 games to sort of dive into the regular season, but we see how rusty sort of players get. And some players at the start of the year, it takes them till December to really get into a rhythm, get into a groove. And we've seen that happen on multiple occasions. So we don't know how people are going to come back, if they're going to be in form and knocking down their shots and stuff. And usually when players are rusty, they're not really knocking down their threes, and it becomes more of a gritty style of game, especially when the games matter. Right? Remember the Celtics game, not this season, but the season prior when we played them at the start of last year. It was like the second week with Kawhi and Danny Green had that double block, and we ended up winning that game because it was a grinded out defensive style game. And if people are sort of rusty, similar to that sort of situation, and I think the Toronto Raptors, you can make an argument that they have the best defense in the NBA in terms of just well-roundedness, the sort of schemes that Nick Nurse can sort of implement. I think that this sort of new format where there's no home court advantage, players are going to be a little bit rusty. It might play into the Raptors' hands. Obviously, we don't have that superstar that really gets teams out of slumps, and the offensive firepower might be, hurting by that because the role players might not be in the same rhythm they might be. But I think the games are going to be a bit more slowed down, a bit more gritty, a bit more grindy, as you mentioned. And without a home court advantage to really energize an offense, it's going to be the defense that really can take teams out of series that we've probably never seen like something similar before.
Well, let me ask you 2 questions, Ben. So first, you're thinking that the offense is going to slow down a bit. So you're thinking it's going to go more towards college style play, slower games, rather than more all-star style play where the defense is a little bit more relaxed, the pace is faster. Because to me, I'm thinking about it like they're going to be playing in some sort of sports complex or an open facility. They're probably going to have a lot of space outside of bounds. And I'm looking at it more like, what if it devolves or digresses or whatever into more pickup style basketball that we watch when we see people running summer sessions, the NBA players, when they just have a collection of NBA guys and it's just very fast paced, a lot of shots get up. So that's question 1. That is that how you think it's going to go? It's actually going to settle down and be more defensive than offensive. And then 2, Ben, what happens if we play the Milwaukee Bucks conference finals and Giannis is just absolutely beating down the Raptors? There's maybe a 15-point deficit or a 20-point deficit, and there's one big Pascal Siakam block, or they're 8 points down and somebody has a big pivotal 3, but nobody's celebrating that. Traditionally, when they're at home, it's the crowd that just brings that jolt of electricity. Even when you're watching on TV, you feel it, right? A big pivotal moment, the crowd gets behind it. The whole team feels it. Is it enough for one guy to do something special? Would the rest of the guys on the court feel that the same way? Like, are they going to be able to rally off of one play the same way if there's no fans?
So you bring up a lot of good points there, and I'll address the first one first. Obviously, when you compare, this could go either way, and we're not 100% sure how this is really going to work. And once we get more details, we'll be able to provide a better analysis. But I think it's going to get more gritty because these are legitimate basketball games. They are playing for an NBA championship as they would any other year, right? It's a different setting. It's a different sort of situation, but the end goal is the same. So I think the effort-wise, teams and players are going to be trying as hard as they would in other years. I think the thing that might drop off a little bit is players' touch, players' ability to knock down open shots the same way they would when they're in peak season form as they would be entering the playoffs, even though they might be a bit more rested. But the rust factor, I think, is going to be an issue in terms of scoring the basketball. So I think the effort level is going to be the same level. So teams are going to have to push more onto the defensive sort of side of things to really gain a competitive edge. And in the playoffs, we've seen Toronto, that's where they really leave their mark. When they start focusing in on stars like Joel Embiid, and when we lock down Giannis using that wall with Kawhi being the lead man last year, we have other great wing defenders this season, so I think it can be replicated against a guy like Giannis. I think the defense is really going to play into the Raptors' hands as an advantage. The issue, as we brought up all year, is can we score the ball without a true primed superstar? We're hoping Siakam can turn into that, but he hasn't proven himself yet on the biggest stage. So that's sort of my point on your first question there. And the momentum and the hype sort of thing, that's definitely going to play a factor. But I think that's a factor for every sort of team. And the one thing about the Toronto Raptors that we saw last year, particularly in the finals and even in the conference finals, honestly, since the whole playoffs last year, the Toronto Raptors are a gritty team, and they win on the road. They're a team that doesn't necessarily need the home court advantage to really get you going. Obviously, they play better, and that wasn't actually the case in the NBA Finals because they won three out of the 4 games in Golden State, and particularly Kyle Lowry played substantially better away from home. We could probably make a whole video on how Kyle Lowry will perform and being in shape and how he does. It's been known that he plays better on the road during the playoffs, but that's a whole topic we can dive into. But the Toronto Raptors have shown that they have a level-headedness to really just stay gritty, lock in on teams without looking at outsiders' opinions, without really worrying about if they're on the road or at home. And, the Bucks last year, even though they're a different team this season and they're the first seed and they have by far the best point differential in the Eastern Conference, I'm not sold that they're as mentally sound, mentally locked in, because they lost 4 straight to us last season. And they had some big leads. I've rewatched some of those games recently. They've had some big leads and they just completely collapsed. That's something we've never seen the Toronto Raptors do, even when we, ever since obviously last year with Kawhi and this season, even throughout the year with the injuries and all that sort of stuff going on. I just see this sort of playing into the Raptors' hands as an advantage comparative to other teams.
Yeah, but I don't know. It's a challenge because I don't think you can underemphasize how critical it was. We dropped those first 2 games. Once you put the switch on Kawhi onto Giannis, then all of a sudden they go and win 4 straight. You have him as the primary stopper and the primary scorer, and we really don't have a legitimate guy on either end that, like you said, that's proven themselves to be able to maintain that over an entire series. We're hoping that Siakam can be that scorer guy. We're hoping that there can be a collective effort and that maybe OG can handle a lot of the, the star shutdown responsibilities. We're also hoping that Fred can be consistent from shooting from the 3, that Kyle Lowry can make smart IQ decisions. I mean, there's a lot of things. I think if the Raptors play as a team, they can definitely take it to any team that they want. And like we said in many, many previous podcasts, that, if you are somehow able to throw off the Bucks game plan, right? If you have to make them vary from what they drew up at the beginning of the game, and the beginning of the game is the same game plan that they had at game 1 of this season, and the same game that they had at game 50, the same game plan that they're going to have in the playoffs, they do not deviate from that. If you can make them have to adjust, they've proven that they're not able to do that. So if the Raptors can figure out that, then I think that they're definitely fine in this series, Ben. And I'm just overflowing with excitement now that we are even able to have this back and forth because the NBA is finally back. It's coming. It's a real thing now, Ben.
Yeah, no, it's definitely some needed, really positive news. I was really, I'm just hyped. I want the league to come back. I know it's still like 2 months away, but we have something to talk about now, Riker. I'm just overjoyed, but the Toronto Raptors, we want to hear what you guys think about this sort of playoff situation. Will this be more of a positive for the Raptors, this sort of setup, or do you guys want to see something different? Obviously, as we get more information, we'll let you guys know about what's going on. As we said at the jump of the podcast, everyone, I hope you're staying safe. We hope everyone's just being strong, Riker. You have any last words?
That's it for me, Ben. Cheers.